the structure of work is becoming more and more outdated as the modern workforce has greater needs and greater wants and are making bigger demands. What we care about the most, again, is that employee experience. If they are not enjoying their time, they're going to jump from job to job to job. And there's going to be a point where that virtuous cycle ends and it's no longer jumping from employment to employment. You're jumping to a Web3 version of work, which gives you more flexibility, which lets you work for several companies at the same time. It's kind of a freelancer model on steroids, if you will.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership Launchpad, where we help technical managers improve themselves, their teams, and their organizations. On this show, I talk to industry leaders, coaches, and authors to help give you actionable insights to help improve your own performance and the performance of those around you. Our guest today is Josh Drean. Josh is an expert in talent management, people analytics, and workforce experience with a focus on integrating the people side of business with emerging technologies. He is the co-founder of the Work3 Institute and co-author of the upcoming book, Employment is Dead: How Disruptive Technologies Are Revolutionizing the Way We Work. In this conversation, you can expect to learn how decentralization is radically changing the way we think about organizations, what leaders can be doing to create more transparent and community driven teams, and the role HR can play in taking the first steps towards a Work3 world. But before we get into that conversation, if this is your first time listening to the show, please like and subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you're already subscribed, then I ask you humbly to share this show with at least one other person, because that, after all, is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. With that, let's get into the discussion with Josh Drean. Josh Drean, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Matt. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for today's conversation. We have already been chatting a little bit, and I know I think this conversation is going to take people to some places that they haven't really thought of around leadership, management, what it means in an organization. So to start off, I think you co-founded the Work3 Institute off of kind of Web3. I'm assuming.
That's right. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. What are you trying to do?
Yeah. So the Work3 Institute, our main goal is to marry emerging technologies with workforce strategies. You have a workforce, you're a leader, you're in charge of people to some degree, whether you're in HR as a talent manager or you are, a newly promoted leader in a management role who is interested in doing things differently. Our job is to make sense of AI and Web3, as you mentioned. What is the blockchain? What are smart contracts? What's a DAO? And how is that going to impact the way we work, especially at this time where I feel like there's a lot of tension around what employers want for
Yeah.
employees and what employees want for themselves. There's a bit of a power dynamic there that has shifted over the past 5 years dramatically. And how do we make sense of it? How do we prepare for the future? And just how do we implement these technologies to be more productive?
Yeah. Well, maybe that's the a great place to start the conversation is in that shift that you're seeing. I mean, most people are probably aware, or certainly aware, ever since COVID, of just how much the workforce is changing. But any specific things that you see that are going along with not just the fact that people want to be remote, but how that ties into kind of what Web3 represents as well, and just this whole new way of thinking about and engaging with like power structures.
Yeah, I mean, I keep my finger on the pulse quite heavily, just trying to understand employee engagement, I guess, is the kind of a bit of an
Yeah.
outdated term for it. I like to refer to it as employee experience. But there's no data out there. There's no secret that employees are unhappy. Gallup
Yeah.
just posted the lowest number in the last 11 years of
Yeah.
employee engagement. They are absolutely unhappy. That the lowest trust within organizations we've ever seen. HBR just did a study that showed, the difference between men and women and the trust that they have, and especially frontline workers not trusting their leaders. And so, if
Hmm.
you, we can talk all day about being an amazing leader, but if employees don't trust you, if they don't feel like you are listening to them, that you care about their experience, um, if you're just gonna bulldoze them because you have an objective and they simply serve as pawns to get to that objective, it's, I mean, it's not necessarily the leader's fault. That is how capitalism has been established. But
Yes. Yes.
the idea of the Work3 Institute is that the structure of work is becoming more and more outdated as the modern workforce has greater needs and greater wants and are making bigger demands. And right now, we might be in an interesting place where you see the power dynamic shift very much to the employer. We're in an employer market right now. So
Yep.
finding a job is extremely difficult. They can offer really low wages to incoming employees because there's so much competition out there. But what we care about the most, again, is that employee experience. If they are not enjoying their time, they're going to jump from job to job to job. And there's going to be a point where that virtuous cycle ends and it's no longer jumping from employment to employment. You're jumping to a Web3 version of work, which gives you more flexibility, which lets you work for several companies at the same time. It's kind of a freelancer model on steroids, if you will. And that's something that we write about heavily in our upcoming book.
Yeah, the upcoming book, Employment is Dead. Yeah, there's a couple things in there that I want to push you on, but maybe you hinted at a few things there around, almost kind of much more like a gig workforce. You have your talents that you can bring all kinds of, all over the place and move around a lot. Is that kind of the idea that you're pushing? Is there's just much less role for HR, much less role of central leadership, and that it is much more of just worker driven, I guess.
Yeah, it's exactly that, Matt. I think if we were to paint the utopia, right, it would
Yeah.
be you wake up in the morning, do your routine. When you're ready to work, you just pull up your phone or your virtual device, and it's almost like hitting drive with Uber, right? I'm
Yeah.
on hours now, I'm working, and instead of working in a 9 to 5 capacity for one company, you might be distributed across several projects for several DAOs or decentralized autonomous organizations working very specifically within the skill set that you want to develop. So you're cutting out some of that bureaucracy that you find getting a corporate job where you do 90% of the work that you hate so you can do the 10% you love. Let's flip the script on that
Yep.
to where we have you doing more of what you love within the hours that make sense for you, not necessarily for one organization. So when I look at like traditional employment, I look at leadership in terms of management. I look at the 9 to 5 schedule. These are tools that we developed during the industrial age to serve a purpose, which that purpose was to complete a task, to do a thing. And management's job was to make sure that that happened. And so we have this level of not necessarily facilitation. It is micromanagement in a way. It depends on, your style of management, but your
Sure.
job is to disseminate what the upper management wants you to do. You simply have them complete tasks and you make sure that they get done efficiently. Well, that model doesn't serve us in the age of information when we need to move very fast. We need to be agile. We need to be innovative, especially with
Yep.
the emergence of AI. The companies that are starting to use it are going to perform much better than those that don't. So all of that is to say that I take a look at the tools that we have developed in order to do work well and which tools are getting in the way of doing good and wholesome work in today's workforce.
Yeah. Interesting. Really interesting. So many things that I want to kind of ask about that as I was learning about your work and looking at the stuff the Web3 Institute talks about. One thing that came to mind that I think could be a point of contention is this idea of what are you finding when you're talking to people of does everyone want to work like this, or does like a very hyper productive segment of people want to work like this? Because when I think about that, thinking about going back to Web3 and crypto, there's a lot of benefit to removing the middleman, removing the middle arbiter of trust, and saying no, like the token itself, the contract itself is the trust. You don't need some kind of overarching agency to bring in trust that a bank, say, delivers. And that's great. It can allow some people to work really well together. But if you do something wrong, if you send money to somebody on accident or sign something they didn't mean to, and this is you may correct me if any of this is wrong. If you do something wrong, there's nobody to go to, right? Like there's no higher level authority to say, hey, please help, we need to like reverse this transaction, because you can't. And I think about the same way when you in the work environment of, yes, there are some people that want to lean forward, manage their career, develop their skills. But then there's also some people who maybe they just want to work. Like they don't want to like hustle their way through their career to like get absolutely as far as they can. Maybe and this is kind of somewhat devil's advocate too. So, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on kind of that riff of like, is it that you think the majority of work is going to get done this way, and that the majority of people will embrace this, and companies will embrace this eventually? Or is this always, or are you thinking this is more like the tip of the spear kind of thing that will adopt this way of working?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. You kind of highlight the conundrum with moving to, say, a Web3 model. And just to be clear, when we say Web3, I think the big foundational principle that we're talking about is decentralization. That's
Sure.
the argument,
Yes.
right? It's
Yeah.
centralized leadership, which is a small group of decision makers at the top of the organization disseminating decision making information all the way throughout, versus decentralization, which could take the form of a very flat organization. That information is shared across the organization transparently and quickly so that individuals can move in ways that they feel is best rather than what management feels is
Got
best.
it. Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about here. And does a decentralized model work in every scenario? I can think of several right now that I say no, we
Cool.
should not do
Okay.
decentralization because, like, I mean, when you think of healthcare specifically, when you think of a job that is very procedural based,
Yes.
there are checklists that need to be done in a
Yep.
certain way and not
Yep.
just, hey, well, let's try to be creative and see if this works, right? So I think in some of those roles, definitely not. However, I find it fascinating what you said is like, do people want to work in this way? Like, I think the question for me is, do they even know that this is a possibility? I feel
Sure.
like we've been trained that this is the
Yeah.
model of work. It is go to 4 years of college, get a degree. That piece of paper is going to get you a decent job where you will stay there for 30 to 40 years and then retire with a healthy pension. And it's kind of the model that was promised that we are now kind of seeing is falling apart in
Yes.
millennials, Gen Z's
Yeah.
labs. They're like, hey, we did everything you asked us to do, and it didn't work.
Yeah. It
And
didn't
so
pan out.
when you dig in there and you start to find out, like, oh, well, did you actually gain the skills necessary to do the job well in college, or was it just like doing your chores? It was just like checking a
Hmm.
box. I mean,
Hmm.
a lot of companies and even states right now are dropping the degree requirement entirely because they
Yeah.
need to expand their talent pool.
Yeah.
And the people coming out of college aren't necessarily better equipped to do the job than those who didn't,
Yep.
right? So it's a really, really tough spot to be in, I think, for corporations, for the education system, et cetera. However, a lot of the work that we do hinges right very foundationally on how is the employee feeling at work? What are the needs that they need that to be met? And how are we not meeting them? A lot of times it's not in my book, right? This is kind of an interesting conversation for us to kind of have devil's advocate back and forth here is
Yeah.
leadership in and of itself, like, is training a leader to be a better leader the solution as something that you do better every day, or is it like the structure, like even if the leader were the best possible leader,
Mm.
just the structure that they've been placed in and the limitations that they have to
Yes.
lead because of whatever structure, whatever red tape is there around
Yes.
their role, like Web3 and decentralization kind of breaks that wide open. It's like, hey, how about I return to like a round table kind of feel where I'm a leader at the table because I want to move forward, but we all have different skills and capabilities. We should work together to figure out a solution instead of I'm the boss, I know what's best. You do what I say, and if not, get out because someone else can come and do that. So, I,
Yeah.
that's kind of the theory that we're playing with, and I think it's just food for thought for your listeners.
I love that. I mean, there's a couple things that really resonated with what you just said. Of number one, that idea of kind of what is the role of a leader, and most of the principles that we teach at Better Everyday Studios, we're focusing on new leaders, frontline leaders, and it is really about changing that paradigm from, as a leader, it's not about having all the answers. It's not about being the one that knows right. It's just about creating an environment where the right ideas come to the top, creating an environment where everyone can do their best work, rather than like being the best of the group or anything like that. And but then it totally does run into the culture, the structure. Because, I remember I had a big culture shock when I left the military. So, military, obviously, very hierarchical. And if
Hmm.
you want to get something done, if you want to move forward with a project or whatever, you just kind of move up the chain until you find the person who's responsible for that thing, convince them, and then the thing happens. And that's all you have to do. And then I left the military, go to SpaceX, and SpaceX clearly has a hierarchy. There are plenty of things, like you said, there's lots of procedural things that have to happen. But by and large, the thing that I struggled with is I still tried to keep that model where it's like, there's a thing I want to happen. I know who's in charge of that area. I go convince them. They say yes. But what it took me a long time to realize is them saying yes is really just giving me permission to go try to convince everybody else that this is the right idea. They weren't just going to by fiat say like this is the way it is. I still had to go and kind of like convince all the, other managers or other engineers, other senior leaders that this was the right thing to do. And I do know there are I know for sure of certain like software organizations that take that to the extreme, where if you want to build a new game, you can kind of do whatever you want as long as you can convince people to come work on the project with you. And
Mm.
that's really what it comes down to. So I think so that's interesting. I think that's a great clarification of it's not so much about completely dismantling organizations and saying like we're all just totally freelance and kind of running all over the place necessarily, but it is about creating much more open organizations where in general everybody has much more information and much more autonomy over how they are spending their time. Does that,
Let's.
does that sound right?
I would love to take this example just a step further because I think you're
Great.
touching on something really strong here, right? Because like, how do you build a rocket to go into space when everyone is not rowing in the same direction? Like, that's the problem with decentralization. However,
Yes.
like, are you waiting for your boss to say yes before you excel, before you create, before you innovate? And do you
Yeah.
have the autonomy and decision making power to do that? So, a great example that I like to think about is the way that my son plays Roblox. He's 8 years old. He loves Roblox. Roblox is kind of like the precursor to the metaverse. When you get into the game, it is not like a video game like we grew up. A centralized video game, let's say, is like
Yeah.
Mario. It's you come into the game, there's a start, there's a finish, you work your way through the game, and when you get there, ta-da, you win, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Completely within the confines of the game. There is no exploration outside of that.
Yeah.
However, in Roblox, when you become even a developer, you can develop your own games, you can add it to their server, you can invite your friends to the game. So
Yeah.
it's very much an open world. And when you come into this open world, you and your friends can go into a game and pick like which game are we going to play today. This is kind of like a smart contract, and we can get into a definition of what that actually looks like. But the very simple smart contract in this game is here's 3 games, everyone vote, and the minute they vote on the game, it executes immediately and they go into the game. And so
Mm.
if you want to play a different game, you got to convince your friends to vote for a different game. But that's completely your prerogative and that's their opportunity. And you get to be there and play that game or leave and go do something else. There's nothing tying you or saying you have to do it this specific way. And so that's kind of the give and take that leaders need to decide. In a Web3 world, a leader is not a manager. A traditional manager controls the narrative and completes tasks. A Web3 manager facilitates the group's wants and needs and resources,
Mm.
whether it's through a smart contract, but your job is to manage the DAO. What do you guys want to do? All right, if that's in line with the collective goal here, then let's move and let's decide who's doing what and how you're compensated specifically for the role that you're playing there. So we can go further into that, but I'd love to just kind of hear a little bit from you on that.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I love that differentiation in what it means to be a manager. You have, um, at the Web3 Institute, you have you have 10 operating principles kind of for this world. And, one of those is community. And that sounds a lot of what you were just talking about. Because very often, at least when I hear about a DAO, I hear about it in the context of kind of, it's like it's a community. It's like and so if you're the leader, then you're the community leader, the community manager, where, yeah, it is much less about setting rules, where again, in some cases, maybe there's certain rules to enforce, but yeah, it is about making the best community, making the best experience.
Well,
um
I say
yeah,
let's talk about that in terms of like a web 1.0 versus 2.0 versus
cool.
3.0 world, right?
I love it.
Communication specifically online. When you look at web 1.0, that was kind of like the static internet. All you can do
Yep.
is put some text and some images up on a website and people can go there and they can learn, right? It is very
Yep.
much a one-way communication where I tell you what you need to see and then you see it. In a web 2 world, it is kind of that two-way communication. Now it's social media where I can curate my own content and I can get feedback in the form of contents, comments, or if you look at like Yelp, you can pick your excursions or your restaurants based on the collective experience of someone else's. So we see a little bit more community there. When you look at a Web3 model, and Discord is a perfect example of how this is happening right now. For any of you who have a teenager under the age of 14, they know what Discord is and they're using it. Discord used to be like a gaming chat where you go and you can chat with other people who are playing the same game as you, but it has completely evolved into a Web3 community. It's like a town hall now where
Hmm.
you have maybe these core contributors who are curating specific content, but if you have ever been in a Discord chat of someone who loves Pokemon, so they're playing Pokemon Go and they're on Pokemon Go's Discord, you'll see like channels and channels and channels of people talking about stuff that they like, super niche, like I really love this topic, so I'm finding other people who love it as well, creating a world or just a chat room where you can come in and you can talk about it, and then it kind of goes up to the higher purpose of that Discord channel. So what we do at the Work3 Institute is we teach companies how to leverage Discord and Slack for that matter in ways that previously were kind of unimaginable. It's no longer a email or a back and forth exchange. It's how do we develop a community of like passionate individuals who are working on projects because they love it. They
Yeah.
are drone enthusiasts who see problems with the endurance of drones, so they build a Discord chat and like build it themselves and then sell it to the government. There's so many options for
Interesting.
people to earn money as like an actual shareholder in maybe this web 2 model of corporate America.
Mm-hmm.
It decentralizes it, so now everyone gets to be a shareholder. You get ownership over the projects that you take on and the value you generate. You have autonomy to work in ways that make sense to you and you get to make those decisions, and flexibility, right? You can work whenever, however hard, and for whoever you want.
So I'd love to maybe go into that example a little bit. Are you seeing traditional companies dramatically kind of like developing these projects where they're bringing in people outside of the company, like having new members, or are you more talking about starting from scratch with this is a new way to imagine a company?
It's such a great question, man. I'm glad that you're bringing this up because it is still early, right? We are in the
Yeah.
nascent phase of Web3. It was really hot for a while when Mark
Yep.
Zuckerberg announced the
Yep.
metaverse and it burned
Yep.
out, and everyone's like, what was that about? And it didn't go away. Like,
No.
even though the hype died down, and that was a good thing for a lot of people building the metaverse, they're like, whew, now we can get back to work, right? Uh, it didn't go away. And so what I see in the work that we do is twofold. One is like, how do we evolve the HR department to be more of a people operations function? It,
Hmm.
Everything that was a part of HR even years ago is now completely automated, completely in the hands of AI. Let's let that role go. However,
Yeah.
there are serious needs within the organization for L&D. What do we do for learning and development? How do we upskill our people? What does the retention look like? How do we attract top talent? How do we make sure that we're designing an experience for our distributed workforce, those working at home, those working, as a freelancer? There's so many elements of not taking care of our people at work that we need to do it. And
Yeah.
we need to figure that out. So we spend a lot of time kind of doing digital transformation within HR departments. There is also a group of individuals, right? I call them the human centric digital first leaders who are like, yep, we understand a DAO, we understand a smart contract, we understand how to use tokens. Let's just implement the software, start building out a new framework for how we manage our teams. And they're doing that. And that's really exciting. There's probably a third party here as well, which is like, I think the younger generation who already is in Discord, has already been doing their thing here for a while, is absolutely not excited about any sort of traditional corporate 9 to 5, and so they are offboarding completely from what traditional employment looks like for them, and they're building it. These are, I would say, probably the upper echelon of individuals who are ambitious and excited and want to build something. But they're bringing their friends along and they're building a
Hmm.
Discord chat, and they're saying this is how much you could make doing XYZ. How nice would that be to do laundry during the day or take your dog for a walk, because we know you're going to
Yeah.
be working late into the night. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of benefits.
Well, then let's look at a couple of those people. So if I'm in HR that has more of a traditional bent where I'm kind of like pushing stuff out, what are some what are some of the first steps that an HR team can take to start embracing this new world? Maybe that's changes that they make in Slack, or I don't know. What are the most common first use cases, first steps that you can see an HR team making?
Yeah, I mean, and again, right? Like, is your HR team ready? Is your
Sure.
organization ready for a Web3 world? A lot of companies can't even do the basics of employee engagement. So, like, we need to do that first. If you're As much as I hate the annual employee engagement survey that's like 70 questions, do it once a year. It's only a data point one time a year for your employees. But if you're not doing that, if you don't have any sort of continuous feedback loop with employees themselves, you should probably start there, right? Let's start doing some of the employee experience design best practices
Yep.
first. For
Yep.
those of you who are ready to kind of move on, there's plenty of ways to do that, and it's honestly just a bespoke way of doing that. Like, every organization is different, every
Sure.
team
That
is
makes sense.
different. So what we suggest doing is like, let's pilot a DAO. We've been throwing around these terms a lot, and I no, haven't really defined them yet. A DAO is like a decentralized autonomous organization, meaning you don't have a centralized group of decision makers. The decision making comes from the group itself. And the way that you make decisions is you distribute tokens or voting power. We've talked about cryptocurrency. For now, let's just view them as, if you have 5 tokens, you have 5 points to vote. If you have 20, you have 20 points to vote. And then you use a tool called Snapshot to throw up a bunch of decisions that need to be made at the organization. Everyone gets to vote with their tokens. And when it executes, when they officially come to a consensus, a smart contract executes on that, essentially meaning, all right, you voted, we're moving in this direction, and it can happen in an instant. And if you have, I think the example you brought up is like, I have no one to go to up top. Like, I don't have anyone to talk to. Instead of being like, knock, knock, manager, help me out, it's get in Snapshot, pose the question, have
Mm,
everyone vote on it, and then you move in that direction. So it's
okay.
it's it's kind of like a radical rethinking of these hierarchical structures.
Yeah.
And I don't think I think there's a lot of mindset change that needs to come along with that.
Yeah, but I mean, it really does. It actually, you're reminding me of the All In podcast had a conversation maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, where so this is a group of tech founders who have worked at helped start Google and those kinds of things, and they said in their at least in their startups when they're at like the 200 or 300 person stages, this sounds very similar to how they make benefits decisions, payroll decisions, is they put it out there to the actual employee group, be like, what are you all wanting? And they don't look to create kind of like a grand committee of these are the people who are going to figure out the right thing and know what our employees want. They crowdsource from the employees for that.
Mhm.
So it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, I mean, another great example is there's a company called Talent Pair, who is a recruiting agency that has gone fully Web3. And what that means is they've looked at some of the pains around the recruiting phase,
Hmm.
specifically when you look at recruiting, and it's extremely cutthroat. If you're working off of commissions, it can
Yeah.
be cutthroat
Yeah.
because you're essentially competing against other people, right? So how are you being compensated? Is it when you close the deal and find a job for someone, or shouldn't we be giving a portion of credit to anyone who played a role within the pipeline of that specific individual? And so what
Interesting.
they're doing is they leverage smart contracts exactly for that. If you bring someone into the network that's, some arbitrary percent of the commission, and then if you're the one that did the assessment, if you're the one that matched them with the organization, the minute they find a job, the smart contract executes, and everyone gets money directly into their account based
Yep.
on the part of the life cycle they played, instead of worrying about who got what. And when you really think about the trust that brings back, and the fun thing about Web3 is we talk about a system of trustless trust. When you think of
Hmm.
trust but verify, now it's just verify, and it's
Yeah.
verified on the blockchain, so there's no fighting. I say this in theory. There's less competition. You work together as a team. There's more transparency, and it all moves in a way that doesn't pit employees against each other. It brings you together as a team.
Yeah. Well, and then I think I love that, to bring this back to the manager role, it really transforms the manager role into, at least in my opinion, what it what it should be, or what it should have been all along, where the manager is there to help people perform their best, to help them overcome blockers, to help facilitate conversations, to help build trust. They're not there to be the arbiter of information, to be the one that is always making the decisions and telling people what to do. So it really clarifies it, though it might cloud in the short term. In the long term, I think it clarifies what the role of a leader is, because certain roles become put into these contractual things that, they know they don't have to worry about.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating thought, right? When you look at the short term, right, it does feel extremely chaotic because it doesn't match what we are used to. But
Yeah.
if I can kind of paint the picture for what it looks like, if I am a leader at an organization and I want to get something done, a lot of times it's, here are the 9 people, or here are the 20 people, like within my organization. Here's the skills that I have available to me. Here's the limitations that I have, and here's how fast we can do that. When you look at a decentralized version of that, it would be, I have a vision, I know where we need to go, but instead of trying to get this group of people all rowing in the same direction, how about I launch several bounties? This is essentially the scope of a project. You send it out into the Web3 world, and DAOs can, or bounty hunters can come in and pick up projects, work for you, add value. And now you have, say, 15 or 20 DAOs that you work with, and you can manage them so much easier through a smart contract, leveraging AI, and now you are being so much more effective because you can manage much more than you could have otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
because you've outsourced a lot of the automated elements that you would have needed, right? Like, I'm reviewing paperwork, I'm asking this person this, I'm reviewing the project, we're having long, arduous meetings. It's like, here's where we want to get to. You guys all go. Whoever gets there first gets paid.
Yeah. That's interesting. It reminds me. I just yesterday I was having a conversation with somebody who they were using gigs in order to help as part of their leadership development pipeline, where rather than just becoming a manager and being in charge of 10 people, you start by like managing a project where you say like here's a particular outcome, and then you get this first chance at like figuring out, do I like trying to lead 2 or 3 people towards this outcome? And then if it turns out you do like it, then it can get bigger and bigger. And kind of in your world, I can imagine this decentralized approach where first you have a small vision, this, I think this is the right thing, and you only need to attract like 1 or 2 people. But then the better you get at that, kind of almost just it's naturally going to happen where you are able to go after larger and larger visions as you can attract more and more people to your vision. And then that's kind of how you, I guess, would move forward in the company, only by proving that you can create a good community and attract people to it in order to achieve an outcome.
Yeah, and think about the individual, right? What does the individual employee, quote, employee want? There are certain needs that we can meet in a traditional corporate structure, but there are needs that they have that we're just not willing to in today's world, right? And that's kind of the 10 operating principles, right? Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
are you willing to give the employees the flexibility they need to work from home? Yes or no? Are you willing to give them transparency? Are you willing to give them decision making power? And, you know, if they aren't going to get these needs met, they're going to go somewhere else. And that's when they kind of
Hmm.
offboard to this global talent marketplace. And what's fascinating about this concept is that, yes, freelancing and gig work has existed for a long time, but in a Web3 world, you can have your skills, say it's your resume, right? Your resume of skills and experiences are all imprinted on the blockchain. It's kind of like your digital resume, and it's hard coded, which means now that we have that trust in place, AI can go out and find projects for you that align to your specs of skills, align to your preferences of when you want to work, and in the meantime bringing together, you know, people that you would want to work with. And now within a second you are matched on a project and you're working in a way that makes more sense to you and also meets those needs, rather than, oh well, I'll just tough it out for the next 6 months and hopefully I'll be able to do a project that I want to do.
Yeah.
And so again, the challenges of a gig economy today is it's still a grind, it's still extremely competitive. Once we kind of beat some of those elements, the world is your oyster. You can put out a project, someone can pick it up in, you know, India without true verification, a traditional verification, and they can run with whatever, you know, whatever project that they feel works for them. So again, I want to just put a caveat on this. Like, we're writing a book with HBR right now. This is all kind of new and emerging and is radical and disruptive in a way, and is, you know, largely untested. So take it with a grain
Yeah.
of salt. Maybe
Totally.
we are completely crazy and these, you know, people pushing towards it are just you know, off the mark. But I the reason why I believe in it is because I do believe it solves some of these foundational problems
Sure.
of meeting the needs of employees in today's workforce.
Yeah, I mean that's a great caveat, but I do think there is, sure there's that future world where it's just like everything's, it's a true Web3 world and AI is matching all these skills and you're just popping up and you get a notification that said here's a good job. That's really that I mean that's a big vision that still needs to be proven and tested and is really far out there. But you can back that up to the point of I am an individual manager even inside a traditional organization, and you can take some of these Work3 principles, the operating principles, and just be like, well, how you can just ask yourself the question, how can I push more transparency, at least within my scope? How can I push more autonomy? How can I, push more flexibility within my scope, um, so that it allows you a way to almost as a manager or as an organization to kind of hedge your bets of we're recognizing that this desire exists and we're going to push towards it and be prepared, but we don't necessarily have to try to make this hard cut over and operate everything inside of a DAO within our organization because maybe we're not ready for that. So I think there's a lot of lessons that even an individual manager or HR inside a traditional organization can learn from the kind of research that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think you highlight exactly what our job is at the Work3 Institute, right? It's taking these organizations that want to improve and want to kind of move in some direction and matching it with the technology itself.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah. Yeah.
the foundational principles I think are they're there, right? Like there's empathy, there's flexibility, there's autonomy, like all of the principles exist there. And we can go about implementing those in ways that like make sense to us today, right? You pull up an HBR article and it says, do you want to have more productive, a high performing team, let's say?
Yeah.
Well, then run regular one-on-ones with them, find out what they're feeling, try and give them what they need and design an experience around their needs. Like that's
Yeah.
pretty standard employee
Pretty
experience.
standard. Yes.
So that's a great starting place. Where we come in is like, yes, do that definitely, but check out this technology. This is blockchain technology. There's a new app that will allow you to XYZ. And so it might even be as simple as, hey, instead of using email to communicate with your teams, let's try Discord. Let's do
Yeah.
it in this platform where people can chat better. And let's teach you how to set up a server. Let's teach you how to create regular content, organize that content, and and that will serve your people much better than what you were originally planning. You know, that to us is a win. Is those stepping
Yeah.
stones.
I love it. I love it. Well, so for anyone listening who is interested in maybe taking that next step, what's the best way for them to reach out to you and
Yeah,
just
I mean,
follow you? Yeah.
I appreciate that. We hit up our Discord,
Ha,
hit up
excellent.
our TikTok. We are constantly putting out content around this, but
Oh, great.
work3.me is the website. At Josh Drean, I'm highly active on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to jump into any conversation of anyone who's interested or has more questions about what the future of work looks like from a Web3 decentralized lens.
That's great. Well, obviously we've only scratched the surface with this kind of stuff. So maybe as you get deeper into the book, once the book is ready to launch, because the book is it later this year or next year? It's next year, right?
Yep, January 28th is the official launch date, but you can pre-order if you're interested. It's up in Barnes & Noble. It's up in Amazon right now, so follow along.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely link to that so everybody can pre-order, and then maybe when it comes out and you've really finalized your learnings, lessons, have you back on and see if we can take this discussion one step further.
Well, it's been a privilege, Matt. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you're a fan of this podcast and have ideas for future episodes, I would really love to hear from you. Send an email to podcast@bettereverydaystudios.com, and we would love to incorporate your ideas into the show. While you're at it, make sure to like this episode and subscribe so you never miss a future episode. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next time on the Making Better podcast.